The last man on earth. This world, once filled with rivers, seas, and diverse life, both animal and plant, was dying. The dried-up beds of once mighty rivers scarred the earth with deep wounds and stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The scorching heat and swelter were all-consuming, and an unusually enormous sun hung over the earth. This world had been moving closer and closer to the sun for not even thousands, but millions of years, and now what had warmed and given life was mercilessly burning everything around, killing even the surviving shrubs that looked more like bizarre patterns of barbed wire. If you tried, you could still find the remains of ancient cities. They were indicated by the skeletons of once colossal buildings, once built by humans to prop up the heavens. Now, these crumbling remains were only a miraculously preserved shadow of the former power of the once reigning species here, man. Humans did not perish immediately. Their contemporary science at that time warned everyone about the imminent catastrophe that awaited humanity. But society did not believe the scientists' forecasts and made no attempts to rectify the situation. When life at the equator became unbearable from the heat and the great migration of peoples began, people faced truly massive hostilities for the first time. Entire nations were destroyed in an attempt to occupy more comfortable places on the planet. As a result of nuclear war, some places became uninhabitable thousands of years before the Earth became only half uninhabitable. Of course, humanity tried to cope with the threat. Space missions were sent in search of a new home. Colonies were organized on planets barely suitable for existence. There were even rumors that some of these ventures were successful, but now it was impossible to verify. Knowledge faded. The greatest minds of humanity were sent on space missions or hidden deep in underground bunkers. The remnants of humanity could only cling to the remnants of life, periodically migrating towards the poles in search of slightly more comfortable conditions. Wild cults and new beliefs formed in places. Leaders emerged who promised salvation. One only had to follow their new true God. Then they were massively and brutally executed for unfulfilled prophecies, for unfulfilled hopes. Legends were composed about them. The beliefs of others sometimes took deep root in the hearts and traditions of people, but thousands of years erased both their names and these legends from the memory of peoples. Cultures gradually, century after century, faded and led humanity into a new Stone Age. The last dozens and units of people took refuge in the caves of Antarctica. Only here could one still find a little water and continue their miserable existence. Of culture, only legends remained about the remnants of people beyond the high mountains. But no one ever dared to go and verify the truth of these stories. Life evolved extremely slowly. Animals and birds disappeared first, followed by almost all the flora, and then people. Only a few half-dead shrubs and rare scorpions could suggest that there was once something here besides a dead desert. It was across this lifeless sea of dry land that something moved, something long alien to this world. A carriage, assembled from the bones of various extinct local living creatures, drawn by the skeleton of some massive three-horned creature that once inhabited this world. The vehicle moved across the parched earth, leaving a track behind and raising clouds of dry dust into the air. And ahead of the procession ran a dog, periodically emitting a loud bark that was lost in the space of complete emptiness. The carriage simply drove forward. "So, this is where we ended up," said a middle-aged man, somewhat unkempt, with traces of prolonged drinking bouts on his face. He looked out the window and squinted heavily from the sun's rays, as if trying to make out something, but all in vain. Being in a prolonged binge, Semyon in recent days tried to bring himself outwardly at least into some kind of order. It seemed to him that he needed to project a new, reformed self to the world. First, It should be outwardly and under constant mental control, and then it will become a habit. About a week had passed since he accidentally ran into a strange guy in an abandoned village. Then his life was once again divided into before and after. This first happened to Semyon when the witch from his worst nightmares deprived him not only of his childhood, but also of his younger brother. Yes, this world has been dying for a long time, and it doesn't have much time left, replied the young man of about 18, sitting opposite and studying some old folio with interest. To call this ancient book anything else simply wouldn't turn the tongue. He was dressed in comfortable clothes, traditionally worn by the farmers of his village where he grew up. Thick pants that were a little bigger than his current size. A thick plaid shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, worn over a t-shirt, and a sturdy belt with many loops for carbines. On one of them was an oblong object in the shape of a thermos, the purpose of which was unclear to Semyon, because the guy didn't drink anything from it or pour anything out of it. Other items, the purpose of which Semyon also didn't fully understand, hung on the rest as well. At least not long by geological standards, added Victor. Why are we here? You wanted to save your brother, didn't you? Yes, but is he here? No, Victor replied, without looking up from the book. It seemed that reading on the road didn't make him carsick. This world has become a graveyard. Forgotten human gods come here to die now. Gods come here to die. That's right, but you'll see it yet. The carriage stopped, and Victor slowly rose from his seat and exited the cool interior. As soon as the door opened, a stream of hot, dry air rushed in. Semyon lost his breath for a second. The door closed again. Victor carefully approached a small mound of sand, unremarkable, like a million others in this world. The young man took out a knife, stuck it in the sand and poked around. A scorpion crawled to the surface, its tail raised in full combat readiness. Victor extended his hand with the knife towards it. The scorpion stung him on the wrist, and the man cut off part of its tail with the stinger. Then he slowly straightened up, opened his oblong thermos, and throwing the part of the arthropod inside, returned to the carriage. I've seen it all, kid. This wound needs to be treated, otherwise you'll collapse with the fever. Imagine that, Victor was surprised. Even now, knowing who I am, you're trying to save me. Well, yeah, you were stung by a scorpion, Semyon replied. Listen, this is no joke. These creatures can be very dangerous, especially perhaps in this dying place, and we're losing precious time. No need to worry, Semyon, the young man smiled. I can't be poisoned, and killing me will also be very difficult. I'll be perfectly fine. So how are we going to save my brother if he's not in this world? Semyon changed the subject. The world you and your brother entered as children, Victor began calmly, is the world of the ancient forest, the world of chthonic eternal beings. I can open passages to the worlds of death, but for passages to the worlds of the eternal, I need the knowledge of the eternal. The carriage swayed and there was a crash, as if something incredibly heavy had fallen to the ground. Then again and again, without ceasing, the crashing sound grew louder, and the carriage slowly rocked in time with the impacts. Semyon began to look around fearfully, trying to make out something in the windows. Victor sat calmly, studying the book. The sound of the impacts drew so close that it was already possible to see through the window what was making such a noise. In the distance, a creature unlike anything Semyon had ever seen before was moving past the carriage. Something was walking far from their transport. Huge, as tall as the skeletons of destroyed human skyscrapers sticking out of the sand, reptilian paws, ending in sharp claws, beat the ground, raising clouds of dust and dozens of stones into the air. Then, the pose transitioned into something resembling limbs that we have seen many times on dogs. A human torso, completely covered in green scales, was wrapped in a belt tied around a strong, muscular body. A kind of ancient chiton was wrapped around its waist. Equally strong, muscular human arms extended from the creature's shoulders, and sickle-shaped claws protruded from its fingers. All of this ended with a mixture of a lion's head with human features and huge, seemingly perfectly round eyes. The creature's gaze was stern, unblinking, and seemingly somewhat tired. The head was framed by a crown that disappeared with its rim somewhere in the depths of the curls, a semblance of a mane which was braided in places. Wings, covered in huge feathers, protruded from the back, spanning the entire height of the gigantic creature. The feathers, shimmering in the sunlight, were predominantly blue-green. A scorpion's tail trailed limply along the ground behind the creature itself. "Who is that?" Semyon breathed out in reverent horror. "That's Pazuzu," Victor answered and looked at the creature. "There's no one left in our world who worships him. His time has come, and he has appeared here to die. We are here for his help." The carriage, obeying Victor's silent will, moved towards Pazuzu. The sun was setting below the horizon, and darkness was covering this agonizing world. Pazuzu walked heavier and heavier, moving his paws ever slower. Periodically, he stumbled and either fell heavily to the ground or managed to stop the fall by dropping to one knee. If he noticed his pursuers, he simply ignored them due to their insignificance to himself and the world. When the sun had practically disappeared below the horizon and darkness had covered the world, and the temperature began to fall, the winged dying god, completely exhausted, was already lying on the ground. Pazuzu breathed heavily, his back pressed against a nameless mountain, curled up in the fetal position. He stared ahead and breathed rapidly, saliva dripping from his furry muzzle onto the ground. Moisture irrigated this land for the first time in many millennia, and therefore was quickly absorbed by it, leaving no trace. Pazuzu let out a loud cry of pain and despair, which echoed for many kilometers around. After that, he fell silent. His black pupils dilated, filling almost the entire white of his eyes, and became matte, losing the spark of life. "We need to hurry," Victor said tensely, and pulling Semyon outside, headed towards the perished body of the forgotten deity. "Why? Do you think he didn't die?" Semyon followed, and the hot air scorched his lungs. He covered his face and coughed. His eyes felt as if they had dried out, and he squeezed his eyelids shut with difficulty to avoid damaging the mucous membrane. "You'll feel better soon," Victor said, running his hand over Semyon's face. Air filled his lungs again, his eyes could see, and he straightened up. "There's no time," the young man repeated with tension in his voice. "What happened, man? Explain it to me." "This world is a graveyard, but there is some semblance of life here," Victor replied, equally tense, looking around and confidently walking towards the corpse. "They will be here soon." "Damn it," the man said and stopped. Victor turned around. "I stepped on something wet." The man was surprised by his own words. Semyon stood in a puddle, resembling an oil slick that gradually spread, capturing more and more space. The man stood and stared uncomprehendingly at his feet, watching what was happening. A black, skinny hand burst from the puddle and grabbed Semyon's leg. He screamed loudly. A young man rushed to his aid and with all his might kicked the unknown limb at the wrist. The man was able to free himself when Victor pulled him from the spot, and they both fell to the ground. Following the first hand, another outstretched limb appeared, attempting to grasp something. "Quickly, follow me!" shouted Victor. Jumping to his feet, Semyon rushed after his guide towards the gigantic corpse. Black, sticky spots appeared randomly around them without any clear system, but they all quickly spread, increasing in size. Hands abruptly burst from them, still trying to grab some clumsy victim. Dozens of hands stuck out of each such spot. Gradually they lengthened. They pulled themselves out as if from some pit, until human heads, covered in a thick black substance, began to appear. As soon as a head appeared, it would open its eyes, burning in the twilight, and a maw full of fangs, and begin to wail with a loud guttural rasp. The eyes rotated madly. Then, focusing sharply on the alien form, they quickly pulled themselves out of the black puddle, trying to grab the fugitives while continuing to emit guttural, suffering, giggling, menacing wails that did not cease for a second. And each subsequent puddle seemed to spread faster and faster. The pair of living people ran with all their might, barely dodging these puddles. Creatures from the black spots grabbed the fugitives by their clothes, tried to seize their limbs, but the slippery, oil-like coating on their limbs prevented them from getting a firm grip on anything, and the runners managed to slip away before the slimy hands could tightly squeeze them. Running along Pazuzu, Victor pulled out his knife, cut off a piece of the already cooling deity's flesh, and threw it into his thermos on his side. Oily stains surrounded the corpse from all sides. At least, that's how it seemed from where Semyon and Victor were standing. Meanwhile, oily creatures crawled onto the corpse and tore it to pieces, greedily devouring the dead flesh. They dragged some parts into their stains and dissolved there with them. Despite having clearly human bodies, they were larger and stronger than ordinary people, and they moved on all fours or hunched over. They didn't stop screaming and moaning, and it was unclear how meaningful these sounds were. The creatures, baring their fangs, moved towards the people in a tight circle, their eyes burning with thirst and hunger. Victor pulled a signal flare from his pocket, and a flash of light illuminated everything around. The ring of carnivorous creatures faltered. The beings squinted and backed away, widening the circle. "Follow me," Victor said confidently, and tugged his comrade by the arm. Semyon was in shock, but still found the strength to pull himself together and follow the guy. The nocturnal creatures surrounded the area of light in a tight ring, and were ready to tear the travelers apart the moment the light ceased to protect them. After a minute, which seemed like an eternity, the people were able to break out of the encirclement. The deadly creatures were now only on one side, but continued to move relentlessly to restore their dominant position. "Hold this," the guy said, handing the signal flare to Semyon. Taking it, he stretched his arm above his head, illuminating their temporary safe zone. Victor squatted down and touched the ground with his palms. The bone carriage in the creature that was pulling it crumbled into small piles of bones. In front of Victor, bones erupted from under the ground where he touched it with his hands, and gradually forming into a single shape, they formed skeletons resembling horses. Victor took the signal flare and threw it towards the predatory creatures. They scattered with cries. "Get on the horse," Victor commanded, mounting his own steed. "But I don't know how to ride them," Semyon replied, bewildered, nevertheless climbing onto the bony horse. "You don't need to." The confusion in the ranks of the oily cannibals lasted only a few seconds, and they rushed at the men again with cries of rage. But the horses were already carrying the travelers away at full gallop. Soon the creatures lost sight of their victims. Moving on all fours, hunched over, they certainly couldn't compete with the speed of the horses. After riding for about an hour and a half in complete darkness, the men decided to make a stop. Their strength had left them. They needed to recover. Having gathered dry bushes in the surrounding area, the travelers lit a small fire. Making anything bigger was not possible, and there was no need, as it could attract unwanted attention. "Why did we light a fire instead of leaving in the carriage, just like we arrived here?" Semyon inquired. I am by no means omnipotent, Victor replied with his usual neutral expression. The ride and summoning the creatures have exhausted all my strength. I need to sleep to recover it. Semyon nodded understandingly. What were those creatures? They are parasites of a dying graveyard world. You mean that? Semyon trailed off. Yes, they feed on the bodies of forgotten gods who came here to die. You saw it yourself. But how? Are they people? They were once, Victor mused. But then the goddess Inanna came to this world to die. She was the first. She was a very multifaceted, truly ancient deity. And a part of her did not want to die, and therefore separated from her dead body, becoming Ishtar. Taking the form of a half-woman, half-spider, she began to feed on the energy of people, using her power of sexuality and love. And now she wanders somewhere on our earth. And the people who stumbled upon her body and tasted her flesh gained long life and incredible endurance. But it drove them mad, and now they wait for centuries for the death of the gods to taste their flesh, change themselves and absorb some of their knowledge. Semyon shivered and tried to change the subject. But why are you putting body parts in this? The man hesitated. Thermos or something? It's more like a sarcophagus, the young man smiled. And yet why? That's how they transfer their knowledge and experience to me, through Vareshka, and also make it stronger and more diverse. Hearing the name of this otherworldly guardian of the guy, Semyon involuntarily shivered, remembering how he saw this monster for the first time. To avoid completely losing his mind protected him by simply losing consciousness, and the man fainted. He was never fully able to see and comprehend the appearance of that constantly changing form. In that fraction of a second that he could see this monster, no less, he couldn't fix his gaze on anything, neither on the countless eyes that blinked and unblinked randomly, and moreover, appeared and disappeared, nor on the limbs that were also scattered over the huge body, constantly changing shape, although it seemed to be somehow spherical. Arms, legs, hooves, horns stuck out and swayed rhythmically to the beat of the changing body. Mouths and maws also appeared and disappeared, sometimes revealing a gaping void of absolute blackness. At that moment, Semyon was so close to madness that he thanked his weak mind for allowing him to switch off and die, but fate had its own opinion on this matter. Why did you save me back then in the village? Victor asked to the sound of the crackling fire. Stop it, man, Semyon waved him off. We both know you didn't need saving. True, but you didn't know that. Victor looked intently at the man. Finding yourself in a village full of undead and death, you didn't run away to save your own skin. You tried to lead me away, to save me. What kind of nonsense are you asking? Semyon seemed to get angry. Anyone would have done the same in my place. I saw a boy in the middle of this hell, remembered my brother, and thought that you were here by accident too. And then I didn't think anymore. I just tried to get us out of there. Victor smiled. Then let me ask you something too, Semyon said, looking into the fire. The young man nodded. Why did you agree to help me search for my brother? You know, Victor sighed. It seemed to me that I had no purpose. I didn't understand where I was going or why I was doing what I was doing. I was just drifting. But then I saw you and how bravely you rushed to save me. I saw that you really wanted to save your brother, even though you didn't even know how to get to the forest where he disappeared. I found it curious, and I decided to make sure you reached the right place. And now do you know what you want? Semyon said, looking closely at Victor. Do you have a goal now? You know, I never had the opportunity to think about it. At first I wanted to learn and read a lot, and I did it. Then I wanted to avenge the death of my parents. And I did it. Although I knew they weren't my relatives, they treated me very well, and I felt sorry for them. Later, people only used me, and there was no time to think about goals. Well, think about it now, man. Listen, I want you to help me with my brother, of course, but I also want you to live for yourself. What would you like most of all? You know, Victor answered thoughtfully, you value family so much and so sincerely. I would like to know who my real parents are. I want to know who I really came from. That's it, man. That's a good goal. Then it's decided. We'll find your parents. Semyon replied and laughed. His dog Graf ran up to him and started licking his face. Oh, Graf, how I missed you. After you were gone, a part of me was gone too, Semyon said to his pet, then added, Thank you for him, Victor. You're welcome, Victor smiled. He was about to add something when a thick black blob flew out of the darkness and, splashing on the fire, instantly extinguished it. Victor abruptly stood up and stretched out his hands to summon the undead. A sharp, strong blow to the back of his head knocked him unconscious, and he collapsed to the ground like a sack. The dog barked, but the creatures pounced on it in a crowd and dragged its yelping body into the darkness. Soon it disappeared from sight. Semyon was already on his feet and was about to sell his life as dearly as possible. But in the almost complete darkness of the night, he could barely make out his attackers. They were the same oily monsters they had escaped from. They advanced in a tight ring and smiled. The satisfied carnivorous creatures hooted and chuckled nastily, anticipating an easy victory. Suddenly rushing from all sides, they knocked Semyon to the ground and began to kick and punch him until, under a hail of blows, he fell into complete darkness. Semyon came to with difficulty. His head was spinning and aching. As soon as he stood up, he vomited. He was struggling to regain consciousness, and everything swam before his eyes. Finally, he managed to focus his gaze with difficulty. Victor lay nearby, calmly looking at him. Not far from him lay a dog, whose paws were bandaged with some sticky substance. How long have we been here? Semyon asked with a slur. In this bunker? I think about an hour. Can you free yourself? No, not right now. Semyon tried to move, but his limbs were tightly glued together with something he couldn't tear apart. Victor lay motionless on the floor. Semyon felt responsible for the boy, whom he had promised to find his parents, and furiously tried to break free from the sticky bonds. A powerful kick to the stomach knocked a loud breath out of him, and he coughed. Several oily creatures approached the captives and, lifting them into their arms, carried them through a long corridor in an unknown direction. They had no strength to resist, and they couldn't anyway, as they were securely bound. While they were being carried, Semyon diligently thought about an escape plan, although his head was buzzing and throbbing like crazy. Along the sides of this concrete corridor, passages branched off into small barrack-like rooms in which oil-covered creatures were tightly packed and carnivorously stared at the prisoners. Only fear of something greater restrained their primal desire to sink their teeth into these soft human bodies. Although, most likely they will. It's a matter of time, Semyon thought. Soon they were dragged into a large arched room filled with cannibalistic creatures. The creatures screamed, raged, tried to scratch and grab the prisoners, but immediately received blows to the head or shoves from the guards who were carrying the people somewhere. One of those standing managed to grab Semyon by the hair and with one movement ripped out a whole clump. The man groaned and screamed, and the creature laughed contentedly and swallowed the hair. Then the guard approached the hair-eater and with one blow smashed his head. The headless body twitched, waved its arms and finally fell. The rest backed away in fear. The captives were brought to the foot of a makeshift throne, standing on a pedestal which was reached by a flight of steps. On the throne, made of bones, likely collected from the remains of forgotten gods, sat a creature twice the size of any present. On its head was a helmet made from the fanged skull of some unknown being, possibly another minor deity. Its body was adorned with some roughly sewn armor made of leather of unknown origin. The face of the creature on the throne grinned broadly, looking at its captives with anticipation. The one on the throne abruptly straightened up and raised his hands, and all those present in the bunker roared with joyful cries. Pleased with the greeting, the local monarch descended the steps leisurely, as if on a stroll, as if savoring each step. The delighted crowd let out a loud exclamation with each step of their master. Reaching the captives, he easily lifted Victor in front of him with one hand. Semyon abruptly rose from his place and with all his might lunged at the leader, biting his arm, the one holding Victor. The creature's hand loosened its grip, and the boy fell to the floor like a sack. Everyone in the bunker froze, and a deathly silence hung in the air. The pleased giant looked at Semyon on his arm and, raising his other hand, struck the man. He cried out, unable to withstand the blow, and fell to the ground. The giant placed his foot on Semyon's head to crush the man's skull and began to press down. Semyon looked fearfully at Victor and said, "Don't worry, kid. We'll find your parents." "All right, enough." Victor easily turned and sat up. "Vareshka, kill them all. Just cripple the leader." The monarch of the oily creatures looked at the boy in surprise and removed his foot from Semyon's head. In the center of the ancient bunker, which evidently once served as protection for humans from the deadly conditions of the external environment, a deafening scream resounded. A scream resembling a mixture of goat, bull, human, and seemingly something else. It was impossible to discern. Following the scream, a creature of indeterminate form flew into the room, its shape changing and shifting every second. Hundreds of eyes glared fiercely at the oily creatures. The body continuously emitted the screams of hundreds of living beings, and rotating around its axis, grabbed the bewildered creatures with hundreds of hands, sometimes tearing them apart, sometimes devouring them with its hundreds of mouths. Those who were lucky were instantly crushed by the hooves and sharp claws of unknown creatures protruding from Vareshka's ever-changing body. The creatures boldly rushed into battle for the first few seconds, but in the same instant were torn to pieces and devoured. The monarch stared at the new creature with incomprehension and fear. Listening to the cries of his subjects, he glared viciously at Victor and, raising his hand, struck a blow directly at the young man's head. The blow didn't reach its target. A long tentacle which had grown from Vareshka's body simply grabbed the giant's hand and with a single movement easily tore it from his shoulder. The giant screamed and, turning around, tried to flee, but the new tentacle grabbed his leg and with the same sharp jerk ripped it from the victim's body. The former monarch fell to the ground and wailed as blood gushed from his body. Victor stood up. His body was enveloped in a green light, and his limbs were free. Calmly, amidst the cries of the dying creatures being trampled by Vareshka, he approached the crippled giant and touched his body. The local king's body lit up with green veins and arteries. A convulsion arched his body in a tetanus spasm, and the blood stopped flowing. The monarch froze in a paralyzed pose. Semyon, seeing what was happening, once again couldn't believe his mind, and again disconnected from the cacophony of cries of pain and the impossibility, the unnaturalness, the existence of such a monstrous creature. Semyon woke up in complete silence. His dog, Graf, was sitting next to him, licking his face. He was untied, if you could call the sticky bonds that. Sitting on the floor, the man watched as Victor approached the paralyzed giant with his dagger. The monarch's skull was fractured, and in places simply missing. Therefore, Victor easily cut off a part of the Bunker King's brain and casually placed it in the sarcophagus. The young man smiled amicably at the man and extended a hand to help him up. Semyon didn't hesitate for a second, although he was frightened. Touching Victor's hand, he felt all his wounds heal and the pain leave his body. Standing on his feet, he flexed his joints in surprise. "What did you do to me?" Semyon asked in amazement. "I fixed a few injuries," Victor smiled. "It's even better than before. I thought that the journey is still long, and it's worth healing all injuries and illnesses at once. You could have summoned your..." Semyon shuddered as he searched for the words. "God at any moment?" These creatures are numerous, but at the same time cowardly. If we had shown such power earlier, they would not have led us here, and it was only possible to get here through them. We had to pique the interest of their leader by showing some strength, but at the same time maintain the illusion of their dominance. "And why didn't you, man, tell me about your plan from the very beginning? Then you wouldn't have been able to play it so convincingly," Victor smiled, and the man just chuckled in response. "What now?" Semyon asked. "Now we really have everything we need to find the passage to the chthonic world," Victor said and added, "Let's go." The pair of men moved towards the corridor. "Vareshka, tear him apart." The young man paused. Slowly. Vareshka's insane shriek was heard again, somehow satisfied, as if he was rejoicing at something. Then there was a sound of tearing fabric, and the paralyzed giant couldn't make a sound. Semyon was about to turn around, but Victor stopped him. "Don't look there." The man readily obeyed. "This is how the last one who outlived humanity will perish one day," Victor said. A dense, endless forest stretched for hundreds of kilometers around as far as the eye could see. This world, filled with rivers and lakes, breathed life in all its possible manifestations. A carriage, assembled from the bones of dead creatures of this world, rode along a narrow path between the trees. It was harnessed to the body of a reanimated corpse of a large horned animal, and ahead of the procession ran a dog, periodically emitting a loud, cheerful bark.